Okay, folks, I'd like to welcome everybody to the June 14th Water Committee meeting. We have, well, first of all, I'll acknowledge that we are on the unceded traditional territory of Comox First Nation, and as always, we appreciate the stewardship of the lands that we work and play and serve on. And we have most directors in the room today. I believe we have Director Cole Hamilton or Commissioner Cole Hamilton is online. So the first thing on the agenda is the Water Committee Management Report. Okay, we've got Grant and McCollum. And any discussion or questions on that report? Oh, here we go. Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. Because we're coming to the end of the term and just trying to think about what's on there that's been on there for some time. The item 5, in regards to collaborate with water for our landfill and with the Village of Cumberland, I think we had talked about. So staff working with the village staff to keep apprised of development planning in the area. That would include us, I guess. And to further review and report back to future of the Comox Valley Water Committee. So I don't know if we're an active participant in trying to look at servicing in that area, which I think there's support at this committee.
Okay, we'll hand it over to our CEO.
Thank you very much. And item 5 is under the direction of Chris LaRose. So I'll just ask him to provide an update or comment on this.
Thank you, Russell, through the chair. So yeah, not much to report on this one. We are continuing to check in with the village just in terms of plans, development plans in the area. We're also undertaking a study, a hydrological study of the surrounding area to better understand the direction of flow of groundwater. We have a very good grasp of the height of land, which is typically used for establishing watershed boundaries. But we know anecdotally, from whatever development that has occurred in that area, that the direction of flow of groundwater can be quite different given the permeability. So that is one piece that we have underway right now. And once that's complete, it'll allow us to better understand where the priorities for watershed protection should be in that area.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of receipt? Opposed? And that's carried, thank you. Okay, we're on to the Water Management Advisory Committee minutes. McCollum and Hamir, thank you. And any questions or comments about those minutes? Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I was interested in the comment from Town of Comox staff that they were seeing an increase in younger directors with full-time jobs that may not be able to attend all meetings, and expressing concern about the town not being able to provide adequate representation. I just wonder whether staff or anyone else has an indication that of how significant a challenge that is. It's the first time I've heard of that being an issue.
Madam Chair, it was a comment made by the CEO of the town of the town of Comox. Really don't have any background or anything further to add to it. But it is, we do see the use of alternative directors with many of our commissions, committees, or otherwise, the Solid Waste Management Board or other. That is certainly an opportunity that the municipalities have when the workload at the regional district may be too much for individuals.
Yes, and I don't believe we've had a challenge with lack of quorum or inability to find alternates that has hampered the work of the board. Not that I've noticed in any case. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I noted that as well. Okay, we'll go over to Director Grant.
Well, when they say that our representation is inadequate, they must be talking about Director Swift. I can only, I can only assume. But no, I mean, this has been an ongoing thing over the years, and it's really hard if you have a job to be involved in a lot of the things. I know that when Don McCrae was on the board, he had the same issues, and he always asked that RD meetings start at 4 o'clock, not at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And over the years, you know, through different job changes, I've been able to make it work now, but it was really difficult to get here when meetings would start at 12 and 1. You know, I was happy to start at 4 o'clock and go through the evening, but that made it exceedingly hard. And I remember Don McCrae having the same issue when he was teaching and trying to get to the meetings. So.
Oh, this has generated some discussion. Well, just reinforcing what Director Swift said to me earlier, that you never know what item might generate discussion. Director Arbor.
Yeah, I think the CVRD is, and along with the municipalities, are planning education session around the election for people who may consider voting. So this type of topic might be worth both highlighting and seeking feedback from participants, because ultimately the chairs are the one, even though it's often staff doing it, the chairs are the one that set the schedule for the year. It's not staff that mandate it. So the chair of the regional district, I believe, sets the schedule for all board meetings. And I forget if it's the chair of each respective committee that does as well. Probably not. It's probably, it all comes through the chair of the CVRD. So seeking that feedback would be important if it's a real problem as identified by the CEO. And it is funny, it ends up in a report like this, which is, yeah, there you go. That's your curveball for the day, Madam Chair.
And Madam Chair, I'd just like to pick up on a comment that Director Arbor made, and that is about the workshops that will be held before the elections. We're collaborating with the municipalities on that, and this year we will provide it as a Zoom online that will be recorded and available to others that cannot make that date or would rather view the advice on another time. And we are prompting the facilitator of that session to really speak from their experience as an elected official, you know, what it means to undertake a regional district service and the responsibilities of the director.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, it's always that balance of the operational needs of the organization and balancing that with schedules of elected officials. But I think it is something to look at to hopefully broaden representation and of our governance. Thanks. Okay. Do we have any other questions before we vote on receipt? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that's carried. And we are on to the Water Committee custom voting options. Grant and Arbor, and I'll turn it over to staff to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Jake Martins is here, General Manager of Corporate Services, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Russell, and through the chair. So this report responds to the recent direction of the Water Committee to seek information on alternative models for the Water Committee voting. And I think it's fair to say that the report also has been driven by longstanding concerns of some of the participants in regards to the existing structure. Those concerns center around two primary issues, that being the unilateral control of one of the participants, that being the City of Courtenay, and water use being used as the basis of voting strength. Those two issues have came up consistently in recent years and were highlighted also in the recent utilities governance study that was conducted by Nelson Welch. It's also worth noting that the board has recently completed a service review of the Economic Development Service, And actually this service and the water service was the subject of a service review back in 2011, in which the voting structure was part of that. And I raise that only to simply encourage the committee to consider the matters in this report and the concerns expressed by some of the participants, as it's a healthy dialogue around trying to address issues that may be present and can help avoid lengthy, costly processes that could ensue in future years if those concerns are not addressed or resolved. As we have background, the customized voting structure utilized by the Water Committee is enabled by the Local Government Act. That being said, the vast majority of services are managed under the standard weighted voting provided in the provincial legislation. That weighted voting is set up to ensure fairness and equity in regards to services, and with the general principle being that the more you pay as a participant, the more say you should have in the governance of those services. There are many options that can be considered as part of this process, but staff have tried to identify a succinct list of 3 options for the committee's initial consideration with this. There is support generally for moving away from the existing structure in light of the concerns expressed around water consumption being a basis for voting strength, as well as the complexity and the governance challenges that do present themselves each year in tallying up the annual water consumption in January, seeking the direction from the municipalities as far as their weighted votes and their appointees, and the gap that is generally there present, in which we're challenged with actually organizing a water committee voting or water committee meeting until that is confirmed. So the 3 options that we've identified have been put forward in light of them being easy to administer, reasonably fair and equitable. And when I use that term quite broadly, reasonable, exact precision as far as the amount of financial contribution provided by a participant and the weighted vote they have is a challenge, and is not really reflective across most of our services. So again, we're trying to strike that reasonable balance of the level of financial contribution and the level of say that any participant has in regards to their service. And finally, the last principle, I guess you could say is part of this is it encourages partnership. Certainly in the private world, you can draw the parallel to controlling interests that are present on many corporate boards or otherwise. But in this case, in light of the partnership approach in regards to these services and the federation in which the regional districts operate, certainly in all opportunities, we look to encourage partnership. This matter was reviewed at the advisory committee, and the committee will have seen the minutes from that meeting. And part of the direction from the water committee was to seek a model that there was consensus around from the various municipalities and the regional district. That was not achieved. I want to be very frank about that. There was not substantive input. It was felt very much this was a political decision to be made, and there was no consensus as far as which model was supported or not. The report, I can just provide a brief summary of the 3 options that have been put forward, and by and large, 2 of the 3, as you'll note, I've basically proposed the shift or consider this shift to a population-based structure as opposed to the current water consumption model. The first one is the 1 person, 1 vote model, in which the committee would consist of 9 members. Each member then would have 1 vote, as I've just noted. It would eliminate that control by the 1 participant over the others, but would still provide Courtney with the largest or the biggest share of say. It also is within a reasonable range of consumption, with the exception of electoral area A. However, that is expected to change in the coming years with service area expansion and development in that area. And the changes over time would be driven by population. And given that the population changes would have to run through the metric of the voting unit, which is established through the letters patent for the regional district, those changes are not expected to wildly swing each year. They would be systematic over 5 to 10 years, certainly not wild swings in the short term. The second model noted is the population-based voting approach. And as I noted at the beginning, this is by far the most common structure utilized to manage regional district services. So again, it utilizes that voting unit to determine the weighted vote that each participant would have. Just like the previous option, it does eliminate that unilateral control. It's within a reasonable range of consumption, again, with the exception of electoral area A. again, the changes over time would be driven by population. The last model that we've put forward here is the principled, or what we've called the principled approach, in which it's parallel essentially to the Sewage Commission, which has been operating under this model for a number of years, provides the two largest contributors with an equal say, and then a lesser amount for the smaller contributors. This option would decrease the voting strength of Courtney, but increase the voting strength of all the other participants. However, there's been no concerns noted over the years with respect to the governance model of the Sewage Commission, but certainly appreciate that this could elicit some consideration of that. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd be pleased to answer any questions in regards to the support. And the last note, if I could make, is just that the status quo, of course, remains an option for the Water Committee, and no direction is required in that regard. So if the committee wishes to stay the course on the existing model, you're simply free to just receive this report and move forward. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. And we have Director Arbour.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I like all these options because they significantly help enlarge my empire in Area A, and clearly I'll be able to talk a lot more at these committees than I currently do. There's just a little amendment I would like to make because, and not to nitpick, but I think it's important because it could create confusion later. In the first two tables, it says, enables Courtney to have the majority, but less than 50% of the vote. I believe the definition of majority is 50% plus. I would like to have the word majority replaced by the word plurality, which means the most, but below 50%. So I would propose that amendment if this passes. And in terms of my preferences, I'm actually, I'm glad that Dr. Grant brought this forward, and I'm comfortable with the one person, one vote, or the principled approach format. So I'm in favor of the recommendation. The population-based weighted vote is a little weird to me because definitely in my area, like, there's definitely not 8,000 people that participate in that service. It's closer to 200. So it would ring weird in my area. So there you go.
Okay, thank you, Director Arbour, and Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. It's never a bad idea to look at governance structures, but I am curious about a couple of things. It's indicated in the report that there's an administrative burden related to the current structure. I'm just wondering if the word burden is a bit overdone. How much of a burden is it? Seems to me more of an inconvenience.
Madam Chair, I suppose certainly there's work to be done at the close of each year in tallying up the consumption figures, and that work, I can look into a few colleagues that are involved in ensuring that number is correct, and it does actually get reviewed by the Water Advisory Committee. And there's been a number of times in which we've fielded questions and had to respond to inquiries around the accuracy of that number and to ensure that it is correct. And then, as I mentioned, once we are confident and that number has been solidified, it's seeking the appointments from the various municipalities for their assignment to their votes and their representatives. So, I guess I won't comment on whether it's a burden or not, but I will say there's certainly some effort needed to.
Sure. Okay, so it does sound like a bit of a pain in the neck that you'd rather not have to deal with. I can get that. I'm just curious about the weighted vote here versus the weighted vote that we have in other aspects of our work through this board and the other related boards. Can you give a bit of a comparison between, why the weighted vote doesn't make sense here, but it does make sense in other aspects of the board work that we do?
So, Madam Chair, the current weighted vote structure here was set many years ago, and I wasn't privy to that process certainly, but it does provide a baseline which is went through that process, and then this allocation of additional votes based on annual consumption and whether that consumption is basically above 4% from that baseline. So it strikes certainly staff and the public that it's a difficult one to understand, whereas at least the weighting voted model under the provincial legislation is based on population, and you can make those determinations fairly easily with a calculator. In this case, the existing water committee structure has been in place for many years. It predates many of those around the table, and is therefore not well understood, and in some cases not well supported. Particularly, it's because it's driven by that consumption of water each year.
And my final curiosity right now, I'm just wondering about the timing. The Utilities Governance Options Report seems to me most significant in relation to the engagement of the Comox First Nation. And I'm just curious about what impact making a change like this would have on that. I mean, does it make it any easier to integrate KFN into the process, or do we really know that? We put that issue off because it's somewhat difficult to resolve. And I'm just wondering if it makes more sense if we're going to change the voting structure to just do it once at the point where the KFN engagement is being formalized.
Madam Chair, I think certainly Indigenous relations has been identified by the board as a key strategic driver, and reconciliation as part of that. This water committee has also shown great determination in trying to work closely with our partners at Comox First Nation. As you know, we have identified that issue to work with them directly around this initiative when both parties are ready and have the time and resources available to work through those. So I wouldn't suggest that that we should hold off on any changes in light of that. I think this committee and the board in general would be more than happy to consider and seek necessary changes to incorporate Comox should that be an outcome. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we have, I don't have the names here, so I think this is Director Grant.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for bringing this back up. I appreciate the opportunity to relook at this. You know, I look at these options. I think the one person, one vote strategy is probably the most fair. It's certainly not perfect, but it's certainly better than it was. You know, I've always had a problem with one community having dominance over the entire board, and certainly had a problem with it being based on consumption. I think in today's world that's just not the right way to be doing things. I think the population-based voting is really just another consumption-based way of doing it. So for me, it's either one person, one vote, or the principled approach. When I look at the principled approach, you know, probably for our community, if we wanted to look at it that way, it's probably gives us more strength. But I also understand that if you're paying more into it, like Courtney does, that perhaps they should have a little bit more voting rights. So I would be good with the one person, one vote system.
Okay, thank you. And it's not showing up. It's on. Oh, Director Cole-Hamilton, sorry, thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. I had a few different questions, but one that rose to the forefront was on the population-based model. It does, I think, as Director Arthur pointed out, it does magnify some discrepancies for the electoral areas. I was wondering why it was perhaps not considered that a population use number be used rather than aggregate population. So the number of actual estimated users in each individual electoral area. So as to, I'd like to see us move away from the consumption model, but I think something that's based upon overall use is a helpful mechanism to be using, and I think it's appropriate. So just curious to know if that model was considered, and if it was, why didn't find that model of population into the report?
Madam Chair, and if I could just clarify, so essentially a service connection based approach, is that I think that's what's being suggested, or I'm seeing nodding head. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and that came up originally in discussion with the with the committee and the direction around this report was interest around a service connection metric being utilized to help determine the voting strength. What I learned, and certainly I'd look for any support from my colleagues around this, is the challenge with even determining the service connections necessarily within the municipalities. Our annual consumption data does provide and has publicly reported on the number of connections within the electoral areas, but I understand roughly 10 years ago, there was a pretty considerable study into the connections in the municipalities and the various land use types. And it makes that number somewhat challenging to precisely determine, or it would set us up at least for another annual process in which we're looking to calculate that number of service connections and then translate that into voting strength similar to what we're doing now. But I'm not sure if there's any other comments from Chris LaRose in that regard. But that was certainly the feedback that I had heard is that sometimes that service connection data is, at least there was a study done years ago and it hasn't been refreshed in recent years to my knowledge.
Oh.
Okay, thanks, Jake.
I'm just trying to figure out what number you are. Oh. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, and through the chair. Nothing much to add, Jake, just to confirm that for some reason the total number of connections per community does seem to be a challenging number to obtain. That being said, it hasn't been a key input to our process. If it was determined that was a metric on which to base voting or allocation, I think we could probably come up with a better way to do so, but it has been challenging in the past.
Okay, thanks, Chris. That's really useful to hear.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go to Director Hamir because I accidentally turned her mic on and then she had to come back in. So there we go. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'm just going to put my hat in the one person, one vote ring. It sounds like just the administrative burden of trying to work on a consumption or a per connection is high. And I acknowledge, the comments that have been made in the past about, we're trying to work on conservation, and it just feels like a rewarding the reverse is happening when we base votes on consumption. Not that I've seen that abused at this table, but just I think I'm leaning more towards ease of just administration. And I just wanted to ask, since staff are still here at the table, if and when Comox is ready to join the table, would a one person, one vote make it a little bit administratively more easy for them to do that rather than having to scrutinize how many connections and or population and or consumption?
Madam Chair, yeah, difficult to say at this point. Certainly, I think our conversations to date have identified that we need to really go into those with an open mind and heart, certainly to wherever that the best approach may fall as far as their involvement and the strength that they may provide at the table as far as their votes. So, yeah, difficult to say whether that makes it easier for that to come forward in the future or not.
Okay. Anecdotally, it looks a bit easier, but thank you.
Thank you. And Director Grant.
Yeah, thank you. So Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the Local Government Act, if you even have one person connected, you get a vote. Because the problem with going by connection is, like, Daniel has 200 people on, say, we have 6,500, but he still gets one vote and we only get two. So I think if you try and go to a connection system, it's already skewed just before you even start, just because of the Local Government Act. So I don't think that's going to work properly if you try and do it by connection.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a few different ways you could approach that, but ultimately, to answer your question, as a participant in the service, they would be entitled to some vote in regards to the service matters. But certainly, I don't want to suggest that there couldn't be an approach that we could find to try and address that distinction or difference between the various participants. But yeah, it ultimately they'd be entitled to a vote for sure.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Director McCollum.
Thanks. Yeah, what I think for me that's missing in the analysis here is an understanding of how other regional district water systems look at this issue. I can't imagine that we're the only area that has one municipality paying the bulk of the cost. And while I recognize that what we're trying to do is address a perceived inequity in the system, I'm not clear that there is in fact an inequity happening. And I mean, I certainly understand why we would not want to reward consumption with, well, any motivation to, reward consumption makes no sense, but I fail to see the connection as to how we would, as a municipality, be motivated to use more water simply to have slightly more representation at the water committee. It's a costly, it's a major cost to our residents. I just don't see how that would really impact the decisions that we vote on here, whether or not we have one or two more votes one way or the other. So I just don't, well, I do see that those things could be deflated. I think the reality is that's just not the way it works. Yeah, so I mean, it's not that I am not open to looking at this issue. I don't feel like the options in front of me really provide me with a motivation to change what we have. Also, in terms of the administrative burden of calculating the water consumption, do we not do that anyway for calculating what is to be paid into the water system? So to me, that's a pretty minor administrative step to assign voting after we're billing for it. So I don't know that is a reason to change it either. So I'll just leave my comments there, but at this point, I'm not really leaning toward any of the options that are on this report. Thanks.
And
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I may,
yes.
Just to make clear that, yeah, certainly in recent memory, I just want to confirm that essentially that control implemented by Courtney has not been seen. I can't speak to a time, at least in the last number of years. And so, yeah, haven't seen that realized in recent time. Also, with respect to other services, I can't speak to the precise model utilized by the regional districts. There are a variety of course, sub-regional and regional services that may cast some information that could support this, but again, it would take looking at each regional district and the makeup and the distribution of their services to determine how they've done it. But like I said, the vast majority of services are mainly utilize the standard provisions of the Local Government Act as far as weighted voting. And with respect to finally just the administrative burden, I do want to just qualify that the concern is more so in there's effort required to do that, which as you correctly note, it would be done regardless. But there is also that gap in essentially governance of our service, which does occur in the first month or so, in which we don't have the details necessary in order to make decisions. And although, again, I can't point to an example where that has really affected our operation of the service, it is just a lingering concern that certainly for us comes up each year.
Thank you. Okay, Director Swift.
Thank you. In the report, it indicates that the number of service connections, if we were to base it on that, would give Courtney the continued unilateral control, which is something we've been trying to get away from. Not that I think it's been used or abused over the years, but I just don't think it's a good model to be continuing with. So I think in order to have the simplest solution, I think I like the one person, one vote model the best. It's pretty straightforward. And I think it's really understandable. And should KFN come to the table, they could be easily incorporated into that model.
Thank you. And Director Arbour.
I think it should be acknowledged that, if Well, the first question is how we're going to vote on this. Is it one person, one vote, or are we going to do a weighted vote to change the vote? Questions, staff?
Madam Chair, it's a weighted vote.
Thank you. So if Courtney decides to do this because they are in charge of the vote, I think it must be broadly acknowledged that they would, put at bay an issue that's been around for decades, and that would make some of the participants feel like their voice is heard. So while I hear Dr. McCollum that there's maybe from Courtney's perspective, there's no huge broad incentive to do that. There may also not be broad disincentive to do that if it hasn't, if it's not perceived that you're going to get swarmed by four incredibly sneaky jurisdictions in future votes. So I do want to acknowledge that Courtney does control this vote, and it's really at their pleasure how we proceed, and it will be appreciated, especially I think by the town of Comox, because it has come up every single year of the term. I think that they've expressed that concern.
Thank you. Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. And I want to first say that I recognize that my remarks may be considered self-serving from the perspective of the community I represent. And so there's a certain irony here. But the other irony that I find is that this issue comes up arguably at a time when this committee and this service has accomplished more of greater significance for the community at large than potentially any time in its history. And I think it's been an excellent term. The completion of the water treatment plant, the working relationship with Comox First Nation, and the other work that's been done by our excellent staff, I think is something that we can all look back with a certain amount of satisfaction with regards to. So, and that of course is in line with what we see in the advisory committee, where it might be argued that staff have got more to worry about than the voting structure of this committee. It might also be argued that the administrative burden created by the current voting structure is probably outweighed by the administrative burden of completing this report and coming up with a new bylaw arrangement. And I realize we're under seat right now, but I did want to ask a question of staff with regards to the recommendation that we will be considering, perhaps. It says that an amendment to bylaw number 1783, being Water Local Service Establishment Bylaw 1995, be introduced and considered. So that means, as I take it, that staff would do the work on a bylaw. And that is then what would be voted on to determine whether we would move to a new structure or not. Yeah. So I guess what I would like to put out right now is that I actually don't feel comfortable voting on this at this table without reference to the council that I represent and the staff that serve that council. So my inclination when it comes to the recommendation would be to move deferral at this time so that we can have that opportunity for full engagement with our staff on the implications of this, that we might fully understand it from their perspective. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Grant.
Thank you. So this has been a bugbear at this table from long before my time. This goes back about 2 terms before I ever got to sit at this table, and the issue consistently comes up. And I think Daniel hit it right on the head. Like, this very vote exemplifies the problem, right? You can't even vote to change the system because there's a controlling interest. And when I look at that, I'm not really sure why you want the controlling interest. You've still got, if you go to one person, one vote, you've still got the majority of the power. All this does is say if Comox or somebody else really vehemently disagrees with you, they only have to get they need to get somebody else to be able to say no. So if you have all that power and you do something that's really egregious or stupid, you get to wear it too, because nobody else could stop you. So I think just in terms of just proper governance, it's just a poor way of doing things. And, you know, and I think Daniel hit it right on the head. This actual vote right here is exemplifying exactly why we have a problem with it.
Director Arbor.
Thank you. I'm about to move deferral on this item, but before I do so, I have a question to staff. If we did move deferral to the next water committee, which would, I think, both give the opportunity for Courtney to go back to their staff and their council to discuss further, and also perhaps to share it at a KFN monthly meeting, just in case, as Director Hillian said, that it touches a nerve or something like that. My question before I move deferral is, would we still have time before the end of the term to complete this exercise with the number of water committee meetings we have done? Because it would be, I wouldn't want to start reading bylaws and then you get into election. So yeah, that's my question for today.
Thank you, through Madam Chair. Yeah, the timeline would definitely be tight. It's tight as is, given that the bylaw, should it get readings, would then be required to be improved by the Inspector of Municipalities, which can sometimes take 6 to 10 weeks. It all really depends on how flooded they are with requests. So yeah, it's hard to put a definitive yes, it could make it, or no, it couldn't at this point. But it definitely could be an issue where we run out of time before the end of the term. Essentially, and that doesn't mean that all effort is lost, but certainly you know the implications would be seeking to adopt that bylaw post-election with a new board and council.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So based on that information, I won't be the one moving deferral because I don't want to get into that messy spot. So back to you.
Okay, we're still on receipt and we've got Director Grieve.
Director Grieve here, first time speaker. Yeah, this has been kicked around the table since I got here. And I think, you know, it's just a perceived fairness issue when you think that Courtney's not twice the size of Comox. And you're both pretty well equal in their per capita, except that Courtney uses about 25% more water per capita than people in the town of Comox. So yeah, 4 votes for Courtney, should be 2.5 for Comox to bring it up to some kind of equity there. But really, in the end of the day, I think folks will just merely go about our way anyway. So it's just a wound, I think, that's never quite healed. And whether we want to cauterize it here and move on, you know, I think it's an opportunity. In the future, we're only going to have more diversity out there and more demand in Area A, especially. So, you know, it's only going to grow from here. So at least with the one person, one vote, it's pretty much the way we're doing business right now. So I would go for that.
Okay, we have Director Arbor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to be prepared to move the recommendation with an adjustment to the table.
We're still on receipt.
We're still on receipt, but okay, so, sorry. So I will be prepared after receipt to do that, with the understanding that there's still the opportunity for Courtney and for us to refer it to KFN if we so wish. And this is not a final vote on the matter. Thank you.
Okay, Director McCollum.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one other comment that there seems to be this belief or perception that each municipality votes as a block, and that's not something that I have observed in my time at this table. We have 4 directors that represent the city of Courtney on this commission, and each director makes their own choices when it comes to how they perceive an issue and vote. So this idea that there's this block majority that can control, yeah, that's a potential, but there's different ways for directors to caucus that aren't related to the municipality that they represent. So I just want to push back on that assumption that's being bantered around in this discussion, that as far as I know, that in the time that I've sat here, that's not how the municipality has represented their interests here. And then I just want to confirm that there has not been a time since this weighted vote system has been in place that the city of Courtenay has used a majority to vote down the rest of the representatives at this commission. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, the system's been in place since approximately 1996. And so I certainly can speak to ever there being a time where that has occurred. But without a doubt, in recent years, that has not been seen. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that.
Okay. Director Cole-Hamilton, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm favoring a deferral period to allow us to consult with our staff and get their advice. I noted in the staff report, it did mention that this is a product of CBRD staff only, given that there was no consensus reached. So I think it would be helpful for us to have the opportunity to consult with staff. And I also would like to see this go to the monthly meeting with KFN, just as mentioned that this is a possibility. But if for no other reason than it would change the status quo that they would be entering. And I think it's an appropriate and responsible move to be consulting with them before taking any steps. And while I realize Jake was saying the timeline is somewhat tight, I feel this is not a problem that is urgent in the sense that no one can recall this ever actually being a problem with the largest user and the party who pays the most actually asserting a majority as a block. And ironically, if this vote on deferral would be one of the, if it were to succeed, might be one of those occasions. It might be the very first. But the only reason it's occurring is because we're focusing so much on the balance of power. So what I would like to see is this deferred to this vote deferred to the next water committee meeting for those reasons. Thanks. And I so move that.
Oh, okay, so just backing up a bit, we do have another meeting starting soon. So let's go ahead with voting on receipt, and then we'll get to the next step. All in favor of receipt? Any opposed? Okay, that's carried. Okay, we've got, sorry, did you have your mic on? No, who had their mic on? Oh, well, Cole-Hamilton, Director Cole-Hamilton, go ahead.
Well, I think I was a little bit early with my vote to refer to the next meeting. So it would now be the appropriate time for me to make that?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to vote. I'd like to move that this be referred to the next water committee meeting, please.
Is there a seconder? Second, okay, any discussion on that? Or is that a deferral? So there's a, okay, go ahead, Director Grieve.
Just one word, 2011. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? I think that getting some more information on this, I think there was, as much as the report was, had some detail in some aspects, I don't think it was necessarily fleshed out all the details, particularly just on one item on consumption. Courtenay has all the schools, the hospital, North Island College, et cetera. So it makes sense that we would have a higher water consumption just with that. So I think, we've got Director Grant, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I find the discussion over Courtenay getting all the consumption a bit specious, to be honest with you. You know, we have a marina, 2 golf courses, we had a hospital for years. I don't think you get to say we have more consumption. Oh, by the way, we have schools in Comox too. So, I don't think you get to have that. We have a lot of big industrial water consumption as well. So, I just still think that going by consumption is just not a great idea. And I think we probably all can agree on at least that part. I have no problem with deferring this. I mean, since 1996, what's another month or so? It's not a big deal. but I don't mind because, we haven't discussed this with our staff or council yet really either. So I don't have any trouble with that.
Yeah, thank you, Director Grant. I was just making the point that there are many complexities to this. It's not a simple conversation. So we'll go ahead then and vote on this to defer to the next meeting. All in favor? Any opposed? Director Arbor is opposed. So that's carried, and thank you. Seconder? Great. Adjourn, thanks.